to be here. As Wendy was saying, I was at the Clampett House with my family for 6 months and in 2012, and I have such happy memories of my time in the Berkshires. So it's nice to be to feel that I'm there virtually. I'm going to present some poems from my second book, which, as Wendy mentioned, came out last year. It's called The Suicide Son. I guess the text maybe is backwards from your perspective, but this is it here. Yeah, I'll present poems for about half an hour, and then I'd be delighted to talk about anything that you all would care to talk about. So the first poem, my family and I were in Ireland for half a year, and I had the experience of kissing the Blarney Stone, which, as you all may know, according to tradition, if you kiss the Blarney Stone, you receive the gift of the gab and become highly persuasive from that point forward. So this poem is called Eloquence. I too have been to Blarney and done the thing, the kiss, with a line of other paid-up kissers behind me, each waiting for a turn. I leaned out backward from the castle parapet into nothingness. One touch of lips to stone, they say, and you'll be eloquent all your life. My eyes were shut, so I couldn't see the upside-down abyss between me and the world below, or small figures on the ground, or any garden archipelago of green. But clutching the iron safety bar, I brought my mouth to that damp stone whose country roughness had been rubbed away by lips of every shape and hue and tone. I want things from poetry that it could never give. Power to undo, to mend, to compel forgiveness and forgive. I know kissing the Blarney Stone is just a thing to do, to say you've done, but I thought, give me a silver tongue. Reader, if you're there, help me play the fool without becoming one, so I can be something more than a lover from afar, something more than a small town mayor in a dictator's tie, something more than a centaur at the wedding feast with a horse's heart thumping a few feet below his human one. The next poem is kind of a riff on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. At the end of Frankenstein's, as a spoiler alert, if you're planning to read Frankenstein and haven't yet read it, at the end of Frankenstein, the monster is on his way to the North Pole intending to live there forever. And this poem catches up with him after he's changed his mind and is living in New York. So the poem is called Frankensteins Monster. I'm aging very slowly because every part of me is already dead. I spent years in the Arctic eating seal fat and things better left unnamed. But now I've got money and a condo on the west side. I smell like formaldehyde. My teeth are grimy. My limbs mismatched. But I'm happy in this place where I'm one more person with panache and an ugly face. I eat well. I can walk the bridge Hart Crane walked, or get drunk and not conceal it. I'm not Boris Karloff, lurching around, a mute. I hate that guy. I get laid. Here, people suffer without believing that every stranger should have to feel it. The other day, I walked from Cleopatra's Needle to the far side of the Harlem Mere, thinking about the Rockefeller Center and the gigantic armillary sphere balanced on the shoulders of the Atlas statue there. My pants are fitted. My beret advances everywhere like a prow. My name isn't Frankenstein. Frankenstein was my inventor. I'm going to switch tacks slightly. This next poem is called Drone. I am the drone of a banjo's fifth string. I am the drone that gives bottom to the chanter in a highland fling. Haw, hum. I am the drone of drone itself, planted so pleasurably in the mouth. A monotone, a lodestone. I'm an MQ-9, a Reaper drone, ranging wide, circling in the sky. No windows, no cockpit, no one on board. See how my hellflyers fly faster than sound. I am drone from the timble under the cicada's wing. I gather no pollen and have no sting. Arriving unheard, I haunt the sky and inseminate the queen before I die. I am a poetry that celebrates power. I bring. The White House is empty. I bomb air, I bomb breath. My country, 'tis of thee I sing. As I was saying to Wendy when we were talking before the reading, I have a son, and some of the poems in The Suicide Son were written, in the early days of fatherhood, and children's books were a source of metaphors and a source of rhythm and meaning for me writing these poems. So this next poem, I'm sure you'll all figure out right away which book it refers to. It's the poem's called 100 Acre Wood. Some of these stories are too sweet for me. Winnie the Pooh is so innocent. His little songs leave me cold. But I like this, your hand across my hand, your head against my shoulder. Your first winter I carried you even along the margins of the highway, strapped against my chest in a sling. You never can tell with bees, says Pooh, who seems to believe that almost nothing can be told. But I am your morose, restless father, and you are 4 years old. You like front-end loaders and every kind of train. I like reading to rooms of strangers and a few drinks at the airport while I'm waiting for my plane. I like the book's final chapter, a story you don't yet understand, in which boy and bear climbed a galleon's lap for one last look out across the land at the sandy pit, the 6 pines, the 100 Acre Wood. Don't forget me, says the boy to the bear, who has no wish to understand what he does not already know. Little boy who I carried through the winter in northern Michigan, I like hearing you in the morning when you lie in your dark room and sing. This next poem's a little longer. It's called School for Boys. I believe in the power of original sin, in the wound that keeps on wounding. The son of the suicide becomes a suicide. His own son becomes a drunk. You're not meant to be so unhappy, you think, so It must be something that you've done. There must be a reason why you are the way you are. I've forgiven the teenage pedophile who lived a few doors down when I was 7. The things he did to me, I'm sure, were done to him at home. Sunday afternoons, I'd be sent out into the yard where I could do no harm beyond decapitating my mother's tulips or torturing the roly-polies that lived in the rotted-out retaining wall around the flower bed. I and other boys would fight, shoplift, wreck each other's fortresses of plywood boards and brick, or earn a nickel from the beer store for every bottle that we found in the no man's land of alleys that led both north and south. The anger, the shame. Over time, these things just become a piece of who you are. You build around them since you can't burn them down. One boy, by far the most precocious forager in our tribe, stole a box of 3D movie glasses from the loading dock behind the Cineplex and brought them to my parents' house with the idea that we'd sell the glasses pair by pair at school. But the box sat below the deck, going nowhere. In time, its contents were scattered and destroyed. In time, I was sent to a private school dedicated to forming the whole boy, his body, his conscience, his character, his mind. There too, some men did prey on children in darkness of a different kind. My fellow students gave me lessons in strength and weakness that I will not forget. And yet, some of the faculty, masters they were called, were among the most decent men I've known. One giant of a physics teacher who sometimes would grab boys by the collar or roar into their faces while gripping them by the ear. The man roamed the corridors, scowling on a rolling cloud of fear, brought me into his office, and after making me swear I'd never tell another boy, opened a sketch pad of watercolor paintings. They were his own, the most fragile lilies, snapdragons, and other flowers, unfolding like translucent creatures from the ocean floor. He let me sit there in silence, turning pages for half an hour. Life's not a boys' school, he told me. Be one man for the world and another for yourself. Then he put his paintings away on a high shelf. When I was 7, all that lay years ahead. In my 2nd grade class, there was a pale, elfin redhead, I won't say his name, whose mother always sent him to school in a tie and blazer. How many times we made that boy cry, I just don't remember. He said he was an extraterrestrial in disguise, and that his people would soon arrive and kill us, every one, or take us off to be vivisected. And his story didn't change when we threw his books into the trash, or when we pinned him to the ground and made him eat the dirty snow. I think I half believed him, but his people never came. This next poem is called Darth Vader. This battle station has no ping pong and no decor. Only consoles, catwalks, a reactor core. You are angry all the time. You've always been an angry man. Fuck the innocent people of Alderaan. Give in to your anger. Give in to your hate. You need more subordinates to asphyxiate. Your task this morning, standing at the window, staring into outer space. Your face is a mask. There is a mask underneath the mask, underneath the mask, underneath your face. I'm going to go back to the children's books. This one is actually by, I guess, a Berkshire's author, who's Eric Carle. I guess Eric Carle is probably best known for the Very Hungry Caterpillar, but the book that got the Carle book that got the the largest workout in our house was The Very Quiet Cricket. So this poem is just called Children's Book, in which a newborn cricket walks across a field, unable to reply to the greetings of the mantis and the moth and the dragonfly, until his rubbing of wing on wing becomes a sound that can speak for him. When the last page turns, the book itself makes a chirruping. Here is the church and the steeple. Here is the coffee table where the child lines up a squad of plastic people. Can the child tell the difference between himself and other things? He totters back and forth on a tractor mounted on a spring. Here is the tension of a spring pulled tight and the father rolling over and over and over in the night. The cricket book, after much rough reading, now chirrups nightly on its own. Finally, the father, knowing what must be done, opens up the book with a sturdy paring knife, looking for whatever little engine, whatever little part makes the lifelike cricket sound. Here is the trailer, the baler, the harrow, the plow. Can a stem grow up from inside a stone? Here is how to sit in silence and be alone. Here is the yard where yesterday the child sat watching as blowing branches made and remade daggers of light and shade. The book's voice box to the father's eye looks like a dime-sized bicycle bell, and as he pries it free, the chirruping intensifies, becoming something like the death cry of a creature with an actual beating heart, something like a metal prong banging indifferently on another metal part. This next poem is called Wolf. Pardon me. Wolf. No costume, Red Riding Hood, ever could disguise this jaw, this brush-like tail, this tongue. By now you must be married to a woodcutter or to a woodcutter's son, but I am still entangled in the forest of your hair. Come back, get me out of this nightgown, and I'll show you how to raid a chicken coop, how to step around a snare. Only stroke my face again, as if it were one of the remaining wild places of the world. Does it make me a donkey, eating shards of apple from your hand? I'd devour every grandmother in the world to get back into your basket. Look at the savage brambles pasted through my fur. Don't tell me that my enormous eyes and teeth don't frighten you anymore. My enemy, the moon, looks down at me like a cauterized eye as I creep into the village and softly call your name. Little scholar, little flame, shy girl in a crimson cowl, let me unfasten the buttons that you've done up to your collar. The shepherd's boy keeps crying wolf because he thinks we'll never come. Red Riding Hood, come help me blow these houses down. It's not like I'm not able to live inside the law. It just makes me crazy seeing little pigs building up their houses with hickory sticks and straw. I have just a few poems left. I a few years ago had the privilege of staying in another house that had belonged to a poet, which was the house of Purdy in Ameliasburg, Ontario. And if you're not familiar with Purdy, he's a Canadian poet who's probably not well known outside Canada, but at one time, for sure anyway, he was seen as kind of one of the real original figures, one of the first early important figures in Canadian poetry, and people his his reputation has risen and fallen a few times. But this house is one that he and his wife actually built themselves, and it's now been converted into an artist residency program in Al Purdy's house. It is strange living in the house of a writer who has died. I use your cutlery, your typewriter. I read your autobiography while lying in your bed, trying to imagine Roblin Lake and this lakeside piece of land as they were 60 years ago, when you and Urith built the A-frame by hand, with no experience of carpentry, using salvaged lumber and whatever materials you could find. Critics seem to always talk you up or talk you down, casting you as the forerunner of all Canadian poets who were to follow, or else as a roughneck and a clown. For me, it's enough that you were many times demoted during a war you found unreal, that you lived and wrote according to an image you had in mind, that you called your house a drum for the north wind, a kind of knot in time. Your mother's good china is still here, asleep inside the hutch. History, your personal history, hangs around the record player, which I haven't dared to touch. But this year there's been so much rain, Roblin Lake has climbed up 15 feet on the grass, making an island of the short peninsula you and Urith added to the shore. Standing at the window near the kitchen, watching a single sailboat pass back and forth across a distance that couldn't be more than a mile from end to end, I feel a collapse of distinctions between the real and the unreal, between what has already taken place and what is happening right now, as if time had been doubled over into itself like a sheet of folded steel. Cottage country becomes back country as houses along the shoreline blink out and disappear. I know better than to make myself at home in a house that isn't mine. Soon I'll leave the keys on the counter, step outside, and close the door. Maybe because I'm left-handed, I've made my way through your collected poems back to front, so I ended with the love songs of a young man, poems for women you seduced or thought you might seduce, and I began with your regrets, the many places you visited, and your elegies for friends who during my backward progress came to life one by one. I have two poems left. One of them is about a statue of Adam that's at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I believe it is a 15th century statue of Adam, and it fell to the floor and broke quite mysteriously after hours, and then was painstakingly reassembled over many years. And as soon as I read the news story about it, I knew I wanted to write about it. I just felt that I had to write about it, but I didn't really know what I wanted to say. So I wrote this poem, and it took me a long time to to find my way into it, but the poem's called Nostalgia. The museum was closed, so no one saw the statue of Adam tumble to the floor and break. No one saw the plywood pedestal collapsing when it couldn't hold the marble man 1 second more. Cameras weren't allowed at the scene of the accident, so no public images exist of the curators sifting through every fragment, hoping to rebuild Adam from the wreck. But you can imagine the disconnected hand still gripping the apple. You can imagine the head broken off at the neck. There's no going back to the garden, she said. No more reading poetry in the reservoir park. There won't be any more lunches in the green room or long weekends in New York. No traveling by ocean liner, no silk stockings, no poke bonnets or broad fall pants for the men. No more collecting beach glass or writing out letters by fountain pen. As the man and woman walked deeper into exile from the garden outside of time, their memories of where they'd come from grew hazy and recombined, becoming pieces of a magic jigsaw that never would stay together or form any picture twice. Now a mystic wilderness where a hyena was licking the injured flank of a giraffe. Now a couple courting in the foreground of an ancient cenotaph. The lovers had invented nakedness and put on their garments made of shame. The children weren't children any longer, and everything had changed, except for the angel, whose particular job it was to stand at the garden gate forever, making sure the man and woman did not re-enter if somehow they came back. And because angels don't mind laboring without reward, the angel didn't feel bored or disenchanted. He didn't spend eternity on the thought that he was getting punished because of something that somebody else had done. Whether he represented stubbornness or human consciousness or just himself or the sun, he kept watching all directions all at once, and never for a moment did he put down his burning sword. And the last poem that I'm going to present is called On the Move. Thank you again for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to talking to you. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. So this last poem from the Suicide Sun is called On the Move. Now that my work's done and it's Saturday, now that my young son is out somewhere with his mom, I might as well roam all morning, spying on the filthy squirrels and on the shapes that disintegrating leaves have painted on the sidewalk. I might as well spend the morning talking to myself, hoping for meaning and unmeaning to braid and begin teaching me what to say. Some days I feel like a monarch at wing, meandering, not really deciding where I go, as programmed as the stubborn birds building nests of twigs and spit. Each bird pipes the song that it was taught and transmits the song to its own offspring. Earthworms driven up by last night's rain have squirmed onto the asphalt to slowly fry. I save some who glue and wriggle, but there are just so many, and they almost seem to want to die. Day by day, I'm feeling my way into fatherhood, learning what my son is to me and I to him, my boy, my kid, an 8-toothed homunculus clutching an acorn in his fist, bewildered that a paper plate set down on the grass on a windy day won't stay put, but lofts and spins away. By the time I'm downtown, I'm turning back, in thought, if not yet with my feet. Before I'm back on my own street, I'll have twice walked by the little wedge of ground where people of this neighborhood bury their dead dogs and cats. A rawhide bone, a ball of yarn, waterlogged by the frowsy rain. Animals have never meant very much to me, but I've got them on the brain these days. How magnetic navigation brings spawning salmon home. How predation, variation, and the winnowing down of things gave shape to a world of species, giving them gills, wings, and feet. But I'd rather be dead than be a creature of any other kind. I walk upright, practicing the song of my species by speaking. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James. That was amazing. Your poetry is really, it gets right into the heart and the soul.
Thanks, Wendy. Thank you, Wendy.
Yeah. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and start your cameras, and we can have a little discussion. John, I know you're muted right now, but perhaps you want to. There we go.
Hey, James, it's John Gillespie. I had a medical meeting and I couldn't get back in time, so I missed the preview. So I'm not sure, Wendy, if you asked all the standard, our standard.
I left most of it for you.
No, I think I don't. If I'm repeating, just tell me. But I'm always interested. The themes of your poems really vary. From the Canadian poet to your son to the museum. How do these are there themes that you work with, or are there things that, like the Adam statue, that present themselves that you start to work with?
It's more that I try to keep looking for new ways to write poems, and I try to not settle into one definite mode or one definite practice, but it's definitely more in the second manner that you describe, where I will be interested in something and I will just try to write about it, and I don't know what's in it. I don't know what significance it will have, and I want it to. In the end, I wouldn't want to write about something and have it just be a private interest to me. I wouldn't want it to never arrive at something that would give it a meaning and significance for other people. But I believe pretty strongly that deeper, wider meaning has to be found rather than decided on ahead of time. So I begin with anything that I care enough about that I can dig into it and put words around it. And I just trust that if I stay on subject long enough, it'll bring me to what I really want to say and what's of greater consequence. And I try to, as for the variety of theme and subject matter, what I hope is that when I'm dead, that all my poems will add up to a full life's worth of thinking and seeing and writing, and that there'll be a whole life there for anyone. Maybe no one will want to read it, but that I feel like you have to operate in the hope that someone's going to read it, someone will care to read it, and that
it'll end up being a 200-piece puzzle that someone will buy, and hey, there's poem number 139. So I know we've asked this of other people. The last 6 months have, I think, just created unprecedented experiences, negative, uncertainty. Are there certain things that you're working on that have kind of popped out for you that are kind of fermenting or something in your creative process?
Absolutely. We do live. I was saying to Wendy before, I live in Baltimore and there's no getting around it. We do live in a white supremacist society. That's a fact, as far as I'm concerned. And I definitely want to write about that for one thing.
Yeah.
And I feel it's a failure and an omission that I haven't written about it more directly. And at the same time, to find I want to write about it in a way that is not that doesn't falsify the subject or doesn't falsify my relationship to the subject.
Yeah. Right.
So there've been a lot of failed efforts, and I hope that I'll stop failing and get it right. So I've written a lot on it actually, but I've published very little, and that's because I haven't written anything that I thought got it right.
So are you working on assembling your next book?
Yeah, I mean always, but I feel like I don't write toward the book. I feel I write poem by poem, and then by the time I've got 50 to 60 poems, I just think, all right, so what is holding these poems together? What things have I cared about most while writing these poems? And those tend to be the themes for the book.
So the other question I always ask, and this is just me with my quirky questions, how do you know when a poem is really done? Does it talk to you, or is it you don't think about it anymore? What's that for you that makes it complete?
In an absolute sense, maybe you never know. I mean, all the poems that I have read in here, someone pointed out to me, they're all a little bit different. Someone pointed out to me that the versions that I read are just slightly different than what's in the book. So I guess, you keep working on them always, whether you want to or not. But as a practical matter, for me, they're done when I can put them in a drawer and take them out 3 weeks later and still read them, and there's nothing in them that I think, oh God, I wish I'd done a better job with that line. When I look at it, I'm not ashamed of it 3 weeks later, then it's done. Yeah, for me.
Yeah.
Could you,
yeah. Wendy?
Hi, thank you very much for your reading. I was really fortunate because Linda Greenhouse told me about this reading, or I wouldn't have known about it. I live way over in Newton, Massachusetts. I was just interested, you were reciting your poems, am I right? You weren't reading them.
That's correct.
I'm a poet as well, and I get so terrified when I'm reading my poems that I can't even imagine adding that other layer of terror, which is, am I going to remember the poem? How did you come to that decision to get the poems to the point where you could just say them as opposed to reading them? And what caused you to feel that was the way to go?
Thanks, Wendy. I started doing it, and there are a few different things that dovetailed in my decision to do it. One is that when I was younger, I had a teacher who made us all memorize poems, not our own, but someone else's. And that sort of demonstrated to me that it wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. I mean, I thought it would be impossible, and it proved not to be impossible. But also I learned that some of my heroes used to do it. Auden in particular used to do it, and Edna St. Vincent Millay, who are two of my absolute favorites. They used to recite from memory, and I just thought, well, if I want to try to learn as much as I can from their example, I ought to try to use their tools. And then also, I'm basically a pretty shy person, and I mean, I relate to the anxieties that you described, but I feel actually, as strange as it might sound, I feel that memorizing the poems and delivering them from memory actually makes me feel more bold. I mean, I'm fearless when I walk onto a stage, but I'm not fearless when I'm in a room talking to some people, and, that's when I feel paralyzed by anxiety. So when I'm delivering poems from memory, I feel I'm just stepping into a role, and the words.
Maybe it's a little more like assuming a role. I mean, you're like an actor then, reciting your lines, and you can remove your own anxiety from it. That's interesting. I might give it a try.
Yeah, it is like that. It's a lot like that.
Linda, you had a question too, correct?
Yes, I had one, and then what James just said prompts a second one. So my original question was, I was just very struck by the poems inspired by children's literature, especially Wolf. I thought that just grabbed me very much. So I wondered whether it was, fatherhood that kind of brought these out. You must have been exposed to them, certainly to Winnie the Pooh, as we all have. And was all that stuff just kind of in the recesses of your mind, and then becoming a father kind of brought it out and made you want to give your own voice to it? That was my question one. And if I could have an unrelated question, you mentioned Edna St. Vincent Millay, also one of my very, very favorites. And, my friends kind of laugh because they know I have a Millay poem at hand for every situation, and I can relate to it. And it's always made me sad that she doesn't get the, the cred that she deserves in the world of literature. She's kind of, put down as a chick lit, poet, and it's so wrong and so, diminishing of the people who say that, who don't expose themselves to her work. And I just wonder if you have, because you're an academic as well as a poet, whether you have an explanation for that.
So let me tackle the Millay question first. And I'm not a scholar. I do teach creative writing, but I don't have a PhD. So I probably don't have the real literary perspective that a true scholar of modern poetry would have. I teach in an MFA program and teach creative writing workshops, but I do have an opinion, informed or not, which is that I think it's sexism partly, frankly, and also I think it's the fact that she was writing metered sonnets in the high days of modernism. And I think that scholars that's made her not only an outlier, but just, real outsider to the critical narrative about what was most important, the most important things that were happening in American poetry at the beginning of the 20th century. To then, she seemed like a throwback to maybe Victorian poetry or late Romantic poetry, and so was disregarded for that reason also. But I think that matters less in time. I think that my belief is that the critical narratives about literature become kind of more complex and more nuanced as time goes on. And, Emily Dickinson and Gerard Manley Hopkins were outliers too. And Robert Frost was an outlier. And all three of them have, eventually found their place and been recognized for the excellent poets that they were. And Langston Hughes, and I just think that, I think in time, people will realize what they've been missing. Oh, and as for the question about children's books, actually, it's a little bit like the question of writing about, this particular cultural moment too. That you have things that you feel about. As far as fatherhood, I'm speaking of fatherhood at this right now. That you have things to say about it, and that it's important, but you're not sure how to talk about it in a way that isn't false. At least that's my experience. Everything that I wrote about fatherhood seemed phony, or it seemed like it was, or that it seemed like that I was too concerned about how I would be perceived as a father, and not concerned enough about getting it right and being true to the subject and true to what needed to be said. And so for me, sort of actually piggybacking on those books like Goodnight Moon and Winnie the Pooh and The Very Quiet Cricket actually helped me find a different voice, helped me get away from my own voice, and in a way helped me get away from some of those anxieties, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Now, Linda, I had a question for you. Is that real landscape behind you, or is that a digital?
It's It's a fake background that actually I got as an email from Airbnb. They offered about 8 backgrounds from some of their properties around the world for available for download. And this one is from the Irish coast, a place I've never been, but it certainly looked nice and calm and peaceful. While I have the floor, I'll just say in terms of Malay, if people haven't read one of my very favorite poems of hers, which is not a sonnet, it's called If Still Your Orchard's Bare. Do you know that one, James?
I don't.
Okay, look it up immediately. It's easily found online. If Still Your Orchard's Bare. And
Spare?
bare, B-E-A-R.
Oh.
If Still Your Orchard's Bare, as in bearing fruit. It speaks to today powerfully, and I recommend it. And I've been to the Malay House at Steepletop in Austerlitz, New York, which unfortunately is no longer open to the public because the foundation that owns it ran out of money to keep it. I guess they still have it nominally, but it's in a very perilous state. But it's her sister preserved it as it was the moment she died, with clothes still hanging and her artifacts still on the dressing table and stuff. It's a little spooky, but for anybody who grew up reading her as I did, it was. I'm glad I saw it while it was still possible.
Yeah, I went to Steepletop several times when I was living in Lenox. It's really found it very moving and eerie, as you say.
Yeah, they may still have a residency for writers, not in the house, obviously, but on another building on their property. At least they did when we drove up a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I think they still do.
Yeah, they didn't have a resident this year because Jessica Piazza did our first session. She was the last resident. I'm not sure they had one in the fall, and then obviously the pandemic and stuff. So, but I just got to know, I was the interim CFO at the Berkshire Taconic Community Foundation, so that's how I got to know about Clampett. And I heard the Clampett committee is meeting and reviewing stuff, so I'm sure there'll be another resident parachuting into Lenox for what is really a nice experience, to be there. And people at the Clampett poets who have said it's really been a very creative time for them to kind of be away and just have time to do some things in a different environment. Well, Wendy, I'm a big Peloton rider.
Oh yeah, I realized that I could have maybe changed from my exercise clothes before I came to this.
No, I'm, if we don't have any more questions, James, I will tell you that I enjoy this hour of poetry so much, and I really appreciate you spending some time. I mean, James Davis is on the Zoom call. He did a session with us a month or so ago. No, it's just a way for me to kind of reset. I guess I call it part of my soul about what am I doing and how can I engage in a different way. So for me, it's like recharging my batteries. So not that it's just about me, but it's just a time and a place where I just get a huge benefit out of it. So thank you for presenting.
Thanks, John. Thank you for having me. It's really been a joy.
Yes.
I got to tell Berkshire Taconic to have a